Last week, we learned how authority influences administrative decisions. This week, we'll focus on the second mechanism by which an organization influences administrative decisions: communication. As someone who has sat on numerous leadership selection panels, I've heard the term communication used time and time again by applicants for leadership positions. They often say communication is the key, or I work hard to ensure effective communication. These superficial, cliched statements have become their mantra. However, when probed for a deeper understanding and application, for example, by asking, why is organizational communication often dysfunctional? Many applicants struggle to articulate the role of administrators in facilitating effective communication. In this video, I'll focus on three components of organizational communication and the administrator's role in effective communication. In the chapter on communication in Herbert Simon's book, Administrative Behavior, Simon defined communication as any process whereby decisional premises are transmitted from one member of an organization to another. Let's break down this communication into three components: process-oriented nature, transmission of decisional premises, and the influence of authority and organizational hierarchy on communication. Let's examine them one by one. First, communication is not a static event, but an ongoing process. What are the symptoms if administrators consider communication a static event? From my own observations, here are two symptoms. First, one-off announcements. Administrators communicate a major policy change through a single email or meeting without any follow-up, assuming that the message has been fully understood and accepted by all recipients. Second, there is a lack of feedback mechanisms, such as regular conversations with operative employees, surveys, suggestion boxes, and open forums. In organizations where communication is seen as static, there are very limited established channels for feedback. Employees receive information but have no avenue to ask questions, express concerns, or provide input, leading to misunderstandings and disengagement. This top-down communication approach implies that decisions are final and not open to discussion. It minimizes operative employees' role to merely implementing decisions without room for input or inquiry. The top-down communication is also dehumanizing. It strips away the essence of their contributions, reducing them to cogs in the machine rather than recognizing them as valuable human resources with unique perspectives and capabilities. In addition to simply disseminating information, you, as an administrator, must ensure that channels are in place for two-way communication. This allows for the flow of feedback from employees back to management, enabling administrators to gauge the effectiveness of their decisions, gather insights from different levels of the organization, and adjust future decisions as necessary. After decisions are made, you play a key role in overseeing their implementation. This includes allocating resources, assigning responsibilities, setting timelines, and monitoring progress. Moreover, administrators are responsible for assessing the outcomes of those decisions, learning from the results, and making necessary adjustments. Effective communication throughout this process ensures that all stakeholders are informed, engaged, and aligned with the implementation efforts. The second component of organizational communication is transition of decisional premises. The term decisional premises means the foundation for administrative decisions. This includes not only facts or data, but also values, goals, and expectations that influence decision-making. Communication is a key mechanism through which those fundamental elements are shared, and disseminated throughout an organization. This means administrators play an essential role in shaping, facilitating, and overseeing the transmission of decisional premises within an organization. Your responsibilities as an administrator are to ensure that the decision-making process is informed, aligned with organizational values and goals, and effectively implemented. For example, you're responsible for identifying and articulating the facts, data, values, and goals and expectations that serve as decisional premises. You not only gather and analyze relevant information, but also ensure those decisional premises are clearly communicated to other organizational members. As administrators, you also must ensure that the decisions made across the organization are aligned with its overarching organizational goals. You integrate the decisional premises into the decision-making process and criteria, and you make sure the decisions across different departments and levels support the organization's values and goals. For example, in an organization that values innovation, you prioritize resource allocation for organizational activities that offer innovative solutions and improvements. The third component of organizational communication is authority and organizational hierarchy. As I mentioned earlier, top-down communication is often more efficient than bottom-up communication. When you receive a piece of information from your supervisor and your subordinates, to which information do you pay more attention? We tend to pay more attention to information coming from our supervisor than from our subordinates. This is deeply rooted in the psychology of power and authority. Our tendency to prioritize information from our supervisors can be explained by the perceived importance and consequences associated with their communication. Information from supervisors often directly impacts our job responsibilities, performance evaluations, and career advancements. As a result, we are naturally inclined to prioritize this information as it plays a significant role in navigating our professional environment and achieving professional success. Neuroscientific research also provides insights into how our brains process information differently based on the perceived power or authority of the information sender. Our brains allocate more attentional resources to individuals who hold higher power in the social hierarchy. Social hierarchies are prevalent in almost all human societies and organizations. They help structure interactions and define roles in groups, including workplaces. Our brains are constantly processing a vast amount of information from our environment, necessitating a system to prioritize what receives our attention. Attentional resources are limited. Therefore, our brains have evolved mechanisms to allocate those limited attentional resources efficiently, favoring information that is deemed more relevant or important for our well-being and success. In social and organizational contexts, this often means prioritizing information from those in positions of power or authority. The prefrontal cortex involved in social cognition and decision-making is more engaged when processing information from those we perceive as having authority and power. This heightened engagement reflects an increased allocation of cognitive resources, making us more receptive and responsive to communication from our supervisors. Our prioritization of information from supervisor can influence decision-making processes by overlooking valuable bottom-up insights. Operative employees' information struggles with traveling upward to reach administrators. Decisions made without operative employees' feedback risk being less informed and potentially flawed, because operative employees often have direct knowledge of the challenges and opportunities on the ground and can offer practical, actionable insights that can improve decision quality. If you consider an organization as a decision-making organ, then operative employees can be considered the sensory system, providing vision, hearing, touch, taste, and olfactory sensory signals that detect changes in the organizational environment. Just as the sensory system of a living organism collects and transmits critical information to the brain for processing and response, operative employees gather and convey essential information from the front lines of the organization's operations. Ignoring or undervaluing this sensory input means decision makers are navigating the organizational environment without all senses engaged. This can lead to decisions that are out of touch with the ground realities of organizational operations, potentially leading to strategic missteps, missed opportunities, and a failure to preemptively address emerging issues. When employees on the front line share their thoughts and feedback, but those insights are ignored and dismissed, they often choose to stay quiet and withhold their ideas. Administrators may believe that they themselves are doing a great job and everything is functioning well, largely because they're not hearing about any issues. This is why administrators are sometimes among the last to find out about the existing problems. It is very similar to the way the liver lacks pain receptors, making liver conditions like cancer often go unnoticed until symptoms manifest through other symptoms such as jaundice and accumulation of fluid in the abdomen, by which time it may be too late for effective intervention. To leverage the full potential of an organization's sensory system, it's key to establish mechanisms that ensure the flow of information from operative employees to decision makers. You must create open channels for communication, encourage a culture of transparency and feedback, and implement systems that recognize and reward the contribution of bottom-up communication. After introducing the three components of organizational communication, can you answer the question I posed at the beginning of the video? Why is organizational communication often dysfunctional? A healthy organization has a healthy communication system. In this system, information flows well from the information generators to the recipients. There is no information congestion. There is no information suppression. But in many organizations, the information needed for Department A to make a decision gets stuck in Department B. The information collected in Department C is distorted or withheld as it travels upwards in an organization. So the people in Department D or the president's office don't have accurate, complete information for making a decision. Let's look at this illustration of how information flows in an organizational communication system. Consider S as the organizational member who is the source of information, intending to transmit a specific piece of information to T, who is the target recipient responsible for making decisions. In this organizational structure, the information must pass through organizational members 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 before finally reaching the target T. This process involves 7 steps for the information to travel from its source to the intended target. Any disruption along with this long path can significantly undermine the decision-making capacity of the target recipient. Imagine yourself as member number 4 in this organizational structure. How does this position make you feel? Are you experiencing information overload due to the upward flow of all information to your position? How to address this problem? You can encourage your subordinates to establish informal communication that bypasses the chain of command. Here is a question. Which organization has a more flexible communication system? In organization A, administrators at the upper echelons design tools, databases, or dashboard for organizational members to use and contribute to. The assumption behind this approach is that if an organizational member needs a piece of information to complete their work, they can use those centrally designed tools, databases, or dashboard. In organization B, to respond to ambiguity in decision-making, organizational members are encouraged to search for necessary information through their social networks, mostly through the informal communication networks that are not visible on the organizational chart. Which organization has a more flexible communication system? What do you think? The correct answer is organization B. People in organization B have the autonomy to decide where to go to find the information. In organization A, if one route turns out to be a dead end, you have nowhere else to go. But in organization B, if one route turns out to be a dead end, you can try another route. Suppose you want to report an error in your organization, such as your boss's unethical behavior of using organizational resources for personal interest, and you go to the human resources department. But you hit the dead end. The HR department receives your information but fails to respond. You later find out that the HR director is a personal friend of your boss. What do you do? If you are determined to correct that error, stop your boss's unethical behavior, and deter future unethical behavior, you can take other routes. You can use your informal social networks in the organization. For example, you can informally talk to the secretary to the president, the director of Department X, or other employees. All have their own informal social networks in the organization. So your information spreads through the organization, the informal organizational communication network. In organization B, since the information about your boss's unethical behavior takes on a life of its own in the informal organizational communication network, it is very difficult to hide or constrain the spread of information. At some point, other organizational members cannot justify not addressing the information anymore. They have to respond in a way that corrects the error in the organization. Why? Because the error becomes so visible and obvious that it is not in other organizational members' self-interest to dismiss it. Otherwise, they become part of the cover-up and part of the decision error. It is in their self-interest and organizational interest to correct that error. As a result, the decision error in organization B is more likely to be exposed and corrected than in organization A. After correcting the error, organization B returns to its equilibrium state until a new error emerges and the communication network responds accordingly. If the error correcting process works well for organizations, why are so many organizations dysfunctional? There are many reasons. The first reason is incentive for power holders. In many organizations, those in positions of power and authority may benefit from existing errors or dysfunctions, whether through enhanced control, financial gain, or the maintenance of their influential status in the organization. If correcting a decision error would lead to a reduction in those benefits, there is a natural incentive for them to avoid exposing or addressing the decision error. This situation creates a conflict of interest where the long-term health of the organization may be compromised for the short-term individual gains of people in positions of power and authority. The second reason is organizational culture of adherence to the chain of command. Organizational cultures that strictly enforce adherence to the chain of command can inadvertently stifle the decision error correcting process. In such an environment, bypassing the chain of command to report errors or suggest improvement it's not just discouraged, but can be met with severe punishments. This punitive approach can create an atmosphere of fear and compliance, where employees are more concerned with adhering to hierarchical protocols than with addressing and correcting the decision errors. The third reason is orientation and training practices. During orientation or training sessions, new employees are often indoctrinated with the organization's values and operational protocols, including the importance of respecting the chain of command. While this can be beneficial for maintaining order and clarity in roles and responsibilities, it can also discourage initiative and critical thinking. Employees conditioned to prioritize hierarchy over innovation may hesitate to report errors or suggest improvements, especially if they need to step outside established protocols. The fourth reason is resistance to challenges to power and control. People at the top of the chain of command, particularly those who have not been receptive to feedback, may view challenges to their decisions as threats to their power and control. This resistance can create a barrier to error-correcting process, as employees may fear retribution for speaking up or may believe that their concerns will be ignored. All four factors above, incentives for power holders, organizational culture of adherence to chain of command, orientation and training practices, and resistance to challenges to power and control, contribute to a culture where decision errors are not effectively identified or corrected, leading to organizational dysfunction. It is up to you as an administrator to establish an effective communication system in your organization.